Everybody asked me why I'm a cowboy. Why am I a cowboy, Andy says. And I'm going to tell a story as to why I'm a cowboy. Obviously it's a ramble, so it's a couple little stories. In the ninth grade in my high school, Vestavia Hills High School in Birmingham, Alabama, we were required to take this test to figure out what you're going to do with your life, And one of the questions, they had like these A, B's, and C's things. And one of the questions was, if you were something, would you want to be? And one of the answers was a cowboy. And I checked it. And the day after in homeroom, one of my nemesis in high school, Ernie Benson, was bitching about the test and how stupid it was. And the one thing he honed in on was be a cowboy. A cowboy, come on. Well, I was a little less bold back then than I am now. But when I was a younger man, 6, 7, 8, 9, the greatest week of my life was the week I got to spend with my grandparents at their cattle farm in western North Carolina near a town called Tryon. Now, my grandfather and my father could not be more difficult physically than two men could ever be. My father was round and soft and roly-poly, and my grandfather was all made up out of rectangles. His body was a rectangle, his head was a rectangle, his arms were rectangles. His hand was a rectangle, and his fingers were so rectangular, I did not know how he could actually make them bend. My grandfather was quite a man in Polk County, North Carolina, at one time running the cotton gin, owning the peach orchard, having his cattle farm, being the distributor for Myers Pumps. He ran a general store. He was a barber. He was a county commissioner. He was a state senator. He was a deacon in the church and a lay preacher. I could not understand a word that man said. But my favorite times were when I would go and help my grandfather, as you can imagine, being a young boy, 6, 7, 8, 9, without his parents around, with this wonderful square man who drove a Jeep, which was also square. And in the back, he would have his fencing materials because the fences were always needing mending. And he would go out in the morning and count the cows. And he would go out in the evening and count the cows. And he would fix a fence or plant something or do whatever farmers do. And I would go with him in this Jeep. And it was in the hills of North Carolina, way back in the hillbilly country. And it had one of those AM radios. And so lots of times it was more static than music. Except something would come through every once in a while like, "Heal, sinner!" And then you would have static. And that's the way I understood my grandfather when I would go and like, the fence would be down and he would be talking. And most of the time I went out and he'd go, "Yeah, Russ, I ain't on that more." Which I understood meant, "Brooks, hand me them goddamn pliers." And so I would hand him the fencing tires and he would go, "Jesus, communist, goddamn cows, America. And then on them arms," which I understood to mean, "Brooks, take these goddamn pliers." Now, it was not unusual that a storm would come through and a tree would fall down and cows would get out and we would have to go and get the cows. And sometimes it was like a major outbreak. And we'd have to get the deuce and a quarter with the wood boards on the side and a trailer, and we might have to go get 5 cows. Most often it was like just one cow got out, and we'd just take the pickup truck or the deuce and a quarter, and we'd get the cow, we'd put it back in, we'd move all the cows to another pasture. My grandfather wore a hat, and he carried a cane, and he didn't really need the cane for walking, but he needed it because he would shepherd the cows. He would hold his hat in one hand and his cane in the other, and he could move a cow all the way across the pasture. So one day there was a storm and the cows got out and we had to get the deuce and a quarter, and we're in the deuce and a quarter and my grandfather's driving and he smokes this pipe. And you had what we called snow tires back then. They were these knobby things that went on the back and they made this whine, and those old deuce and a quarters, they only went about 50 miles an hour, So we did that, and we loaded up. We got the cows. We loaded up the truck. I was sitting beside my grandfather in the middle, no seat belts, of course. And my grandmother was sitting on the other side. We called my grandmother Nanny because she thought grand anything made her sound old. And the first week I spent up there by myself, for some reason my grandmother always thought I was a troublemaker, and I really don't understand that. And when my mom fetched me, her brag was that she only had to slap me once. I learned at an early rule of age, one of the golden rules of Polk County is you don't screw with Nanny. Nanny had a bonnet, and she probably had a rolling pin or whatever she grabbed off the counter to get in the truck to do the same thing my grandfather did. And we went where the break was, and it was getting dark like it is now, but it was misty because it had been raining and there was a storm. So the clouds were like on the ground, and we were in this old truck, and the tires would run, and the radio would, and my grandfather would puff on his pipe, and every once in a while would be, Neil! And then you would go on. And so we got to the pasture, and you didn't have gates, you had gaps, which had barbed wire fence with a fence post on one end with another piece of barbed wire that you sort of hooked over the other fence post. And you opened that up and you heard the cows. And this particular pasture had a creek that ran through it that ran through a culvert. And the fog was dense in that culvert. And my grandfather was working the left-hand fence with his hat in one hand and his cane in the other. And my grandmother was working the right-hand fence with her bonnet in one hand and a rolling pin in the other. And I was working the middle, where they could keep with me. And I remember I had a red cowboy hat and a six-shooter. And I was herding the middle. And I had on a striped T-shirt, red and white, big white, red and white stripes. And as we were herding, my grandfather worked a little bit further over to the left, my grandfather a little bit further over on the right, and all of a sudden I was in an island when out of the culvert burst a cow, followed closely by a horny bull. The cow, knowing what to do, headed for the gap. My grandfather heard him. The bull, being horny, was confused. And he looked toward me, and he decided I was the weak point in the chain, and that's where he would make his break. And he started running toward me, and I had my hat in one hand, my little red cowboy hat, and my pistol in the other hand, my cap pistol. And I heard my grandfather's voice, Brooks, don't move. So I did not move. And the cow, the bull, came up, and there was snot in his nose and shit dripping out of his mouth. And he came up right to me, and all this gross, snotty stuff dripped down on my red and white T-shirt as I stood my ground. And the bull goes, and shakes his head and goes and chases after the cow. From that moment on, I knew that I was a cowboy.